привет! Сегодня
Hello, everyone.
поговорим про то, как работать с
We will speak
протобафом, про
about
его основной toolset, какие
Protobuf,
проблемы он
its
принес с
main
собой и то,
toolset,
как мы их
and what kind
решали
of
поэтапно.
problems it
Меня зовут
brought
Эдгар
about
Сипки,
and how
я
we solved
работаю
them.
в
My name
Ozon
is Edgar
Fintech,
Sipki.
очень классной
I work
компании.
in
Если вы хотите
Ozon
работать в финтехе,
Fintech.
вам
If you want to
очень
work
нравится
there,
Ozon, рекомендую
and
попробовать.
if you really like Ozon, you
Так.
should try it out.
Всем привет еще раз. Меня зовут Василий
Hi,
Близнецов. Я
everyone. My
работаю
name
в
is
Positive
Vasily
Technologies
Bliznetsov.
в
I work at
техдепартаменте.
Positive Technologies.
И передаю слово Эдгару.
And
Короткий
now I
ответ
would like to
часть.
give the floor to
О чем мы
Edgar.
с вами сегодня поговорим?
So, what
Первое, что
will
кажется
we
самое
speak
важное,
about
это
today?
традиционный
First
toolset
point
прото,
is
который
the
уже
Toolset
достаточно имеет
Pro,
большое количество
which
проблем, так как он
already
морально
has quite a
устарел.
lot of different
Второе —
problems
это
because
то,
it's
что такое
outdated.
баф и какие
Next point
проблемы он
is
решил, и
what
почему
is
это
buff
оказалось
and what
невероятно
kind of
хорошим
problems it
инструментом.
solved and why was it a good tool.
В-третьих, несмотря на то, что у нас есть
Point number
отличный
three,
инструмент баф,
despite
он
having a
принес другие
great
с
tool
собой
like buff,
проблемы.
it
И
provided
эти
additional
проблемы нам тоже
problems.
пришлось в итоге решать. И в конце
And
концов, что с
we
этим
had to
нам
solve
пришлось
those
делать?
additional problems. And finally,
Вообще,
what we did
поднимите
about
руку, кто
this.
здесь знает, что такое
Please
gRPC.
raise your hand if you know what
В целом,
gRPC
практически
is.
все в зале.
Basically,
Будем, наверное,
everyone
останавливаться на
in the
этом слайде.
audience knows, so we will
Что точно
not
такое
dwell
традиционный toolset
here.
для работы с прото?
What is a traditional
Для тех, кто
toolset?
работает на Гошке,
For
это сам
everyone who
компилятор
works
Гошки,
using Go,
сам
it's the
компилятор для
Golang
прото-файлов.
compiler itself.
Фактически он
It's
занимается
a proto
парсированием файлов
compiler,
в прото.
basically it parses
Дальше
file
сами
for
плагины для
proto,
генерации нам
then the
специфичных
plugins
REST-кода.
themselves for different
Какие у
Django
него есть
or
проблемы?
Django
Основное,
PC.
конечно, это то, что
So
он
what are the main
технологически не
problems? The
обновлялся с
problem is
момента
that it
выхода.
was
Если вы сейчас откроете какой-нибудь репозиторий,
it
там
wasn't
постоянно
technologically
много-много
updated since
коммитов и
it was
обновлений,
released. If
но
you go
вряд ли
there, you will
какие-то
see a lot of
коммиты,
commits and
обновления
updates,
касаемо
but
оптимизации,
basically all
каких-то
those
минорных фиксов и
updates
так далее,
are just minor
чего-то сильно
fixes and
крупного уже в нем
streamlining.
нет.
There was
И не
no
планируется
major
с того, что
fixes
известно.
are not present there
Базис до
and
сих
they are
пор
not planned.
используется в
The
формате какой-то
configuration
старой школы,
still
когда мы
uses
пишем
very old
20-30
school
строчную
configuration when it
shell-команду
had
для того, чтобы
20,
генерировать
30
код, чтобы
lines of
далеко
shell
не
codes
всегда
to generate
удобно.
code, which
И
not
третье —
always
это,
is the
конечно
best
же,
way
то,
to
что
go. And
у нас
finally,
ситуация с плагинами, она достаточно
the plugin
не гибкая. У нас есть
situation
ряд
is
сложностей
very
работы
rigid. It's not
из-за
flexible
версионирования
at all.
самих плагинов.
We have quite a lot of problems with the
Первое,
plugins
что мы поговорим,
themselves.
конечно же,
So,
связано уже с
point number
самим
one,
прото, это что такое
connected with the proto itself,
неконсистентное API.
is
В чем суть?
the
Мы
inconsistent
все
API.
работаем с
So what's the
протофайлами,
essence
мы
here?
их
We
описываем,
work with
и
proto
каждый из
files,
нас,
we describe them,
кто
and
во что гораст.
everybody,
Все мы
we
любим
can
что-то
have
из
different
себя представлять и
ways.
показывать.
We
И одной
want
из
to
проблем,
show
которые это
that
все
we are
приводит,
great,
это то,
that
что
we have
в
skills,
прото
and one of the
отсутствует
problems it
какой-то
incurs is that proto does not
жесткая
have some
структура, из-за
strict,
чего мы
rigid
можем полностью в
structure.
своей форме
And because
писать,
of
как мы
that,
хотим.
we
То
can
есть у нас
have
в первую очередь
absolutely
отсутствует
different
жесткая
structure.
структура
So first
описания
of all, the
контрактов.
lack of any
Второе — это,
structure for
конечно, у
contracts.
нас
Second
отсутствует
point
каких-либо
is
вариаций.
the absence of
Третье —
any
нам, несмотря
variations.
на то, что протобаф
Point number
создалась как
three,
формат,
despite
который
protobuf
очень
as a
тяжело
format
должно было
is
сломаться
what was
в
supposed to
понятии
be
обратной
very hard to
совместимости, в
break
реальности
in the
обратная совместимость
terms of
сломается там
a
вот так
back
вот. Там на самом деле ее сломать очень
compatibility,
просто, и
it's
далеко не
actually pretty
каждый человек даже
easy.
на ревью это отловит.
And not everybody can
Поэтому
see it even
идем
during
дальше. Вот
review.
хороший пример. У нас
So
есть
the next
классический
slide,
пример кода,
here is an
причем, кстати, из
example
продакшена,
of a code
просто немножко
that's
переименованный.
from the prod,
Это в рамках одного
just
сервиса, и
renamed a little
имеет
bit for
свойство
one of
просто
the
описывать,
services.
как они это хотят. Вторая проблема — это точно такая же, но уже касательно
And the
месседжей.
second problem
Мы точно так же можем
is
расписывать
basically the
в
same,
любом
but regarding the
формате, в любом
messages.
стиле, как
We
вы
can have
хотите
different
именовать.
styles, different formats
Третье,
for different
кстати, очень
naming.
интересный пункт. Когда я
Point number
разбирался с
three
протобафом и с
is
его
inconsistent
генератором, с
description of
плагинами, я
API.
выяснил, что
When I
example
worked with my
one, snake case
protobuf,
and
it turns
example
out
one,
that
camel
example
case —
one
это
and
полностью
common
идентичны с
case
точки зрения
are
компилятора.
exactly the
То есть
same
это
in
даже не
terms
скомпилируется
of how they
технически.
work for
То
compilers.
есть
It
у
will not
нас
be
есть
compiled even
определенные
technically.
возможности, которые
So
позволяют
we
нам
have
очень
certain
легко все ломать,
capabilities
очень
which
легко все
allow us
портить.
to break everything
Следующая
just
проблема — это
very,
работа
very
с
easily.
зависимостями.
Next
Если
problem is
взять
working with
две самые
dependencies.
популярные библиотеки в мире для
If
работы
we
с
take the
прото,
most
это
famous libraries in
ProtoGen
the
Validate,
world,
который
would
позволяет
be
нам описывать
ProtoGen
форматы валидации,
Validate,
входящих
allows us
сообщений,
to
исходящих.
describe
Второе —
the
это Google APIs. В
incoming
нем
requests for
на самом деле очень
validation.
много
And
полезных
second would
хелперов
be
от
Google
типов money по
APIs. It has a
типу,
lot of
так и
helpers like
тот же
money,
GPC
like
Gateway, который
Taki,
позволяет нам
like
генерировать
GPC
какие-то
Gateway,
слои.
which allow us to generate a lot of
И
things, useful
сейчас, как
things.
происходит работа зависимости, одна из
Now,
самых
how do we
неприятных
work with
вещей.
dependencies?
Точнее,
One of the
происходило, так,
worst
наверное,
things
правильнее.
here.
Так как у нас
So this was in
отсутствует
the
стандартный
past.
пакетный менеджер, мы буквально
Since we
были
do not have a
вынуждены
standard package
заниматься ручным
messenger,
переносом
we
кода.
had to
Наверное, это тяжело
manually
представить
transfer
любому
the code,
программисту,
and
который
it's
привык
really hard to imagine for any programmer
когда у
who
вас есть
is
возможность просто через
accustomed to
пакеты
working with a normal language. When you can just use a package uploader, downloader, it's very, very comfortable. But we did not have a technical capability to do so. We didn't have any registers. We did not have, now we do have it, Next point is
в
that
текущих реалиях у него просто нет
on the
инструментов,
current
которые
conditions,
позволяли
we didn't
нормально
have any
скачивать.
tools to
Вот. И
download it
некоторые компании
normally.
занимались
Some
помимо ручного
companies
переноса просто GitHub модули. Очень частая
use just
практика,
GitHub
особенно
modules
после
instead of
определенных
manual
событий, в России
transfer.
снова вернулись к этим
After
старым
certain
стандартам.
conditions, after certain situation in the
Чаще
world,
всего это
we
происходило вот
returned
таким
to
вот
the
образом.
previous
Мы
version
сформировали
standards.
просто отдельный
This is what
директорий,
usually
называли
happened.
third
We
party,
had a
выкладывали в нее
directory,
информацию о том,
third-party
что это за
directory. We
пакеты
uploaded
лежат, и
information on
в
the
такой
packages,
форме
what was stored
имитировали
there, and
лог-файлы.
used this form to imitate log files.
Следующая проблема, несмотря на
Next
то, что
problem,
Google вообще в целом
despite
формировала протобаф как
Google
формат, который,
that
ну,
was
будет
forming
очень тяжело
protobuf as a
сломать с
format
точки
that
зрения
would be
обратной
really, really
совместимости,
hard
в
to break
реальности
in
это
terms of
оказалось проще
back
простого. Нам
compatibility.
достаточно
In
изменить
reality, it was
индексацию
pretty
полей
simple.
или же
We just needed
добавить
to change
дополнительное
the indexes in the
изменить
fields
одно поле, как все
and
ломается,
add
потому
one of the
что
fields,
прото, в
and
отличие от
everything
JSON,
breaks
имеет
down
определенную
because
деталь.
Proto,
Он
unlike JSON, has a
компилируется, он
certain
должен
detail.
компилироваться перед
It
тем, как
had to be
отправиться на сервера.
compiled
И в
before
случае, если у вас
send
клиент не
before to be
может
sent to the
синхронно
service.
выкатываться
And
вместе
if
с
service
сервером, обычно
cannot be
клиент может
synchronized with
взломаться.
the client, usually clients break down.
Вот мы возьмем такой классический пример
Let's
одного
take a
продакшн-проекта.
classical example
Как раз
of one of
очень
the
давно
prod
это было,
examples.
но это хороший
It
пример
was
того,
quite a
что
while
может
ago, but
произойти.
this is a
Вот
good
у нас
example of
есть
what could
обычный
happen.
сервис авторизации.
Here we
Он
can
принимает
have a
просто данные, в данном
authorization
случае username, пароль.
service.
Думаю, все
It
привыкли
takes
к
in
такому стандарту.
user
И вроде
name,
все хорошо.
nickname, or
Мы
login
выкатили
and
pull
password.
request,
And it seems
и
okay.
мы
We
добавили,
upload the pull
тут
request.
немножко поехала верстка, кстати.
Here
Мы
we
добавили просто
add
дополнительное поле.
an additional
Пришел и
field.
сказал, мы хотим, чтобы пользователь теперь авторизовался еще по email, а не
And
только по
the people from
username.
business wanted to
Мы
use
выкатили
their
вот такой
email,
pull
not
request,
just
все
login.
посмотрели
So
и сказали, что все
this was
окей,
the
на
pull
ревью это
request, and
пошло
everybody said
отлично.
it was okay.
Поднимите руки, кто знает, что
There
это
was no
будет,
problem
к чему
during
это
review.
приведет.
Please raise your hand if you know what will be
Ну
the
вот.
result. Okay, so we do have a
В
few people
общем,
here.
ситуация в том, что
Yeah, so the
это
problem
никто не
is
обсудил
that
на ревью. В итоге
nobody
наш
saw this
продакшн просто
during
взорвался.
review,
Все люди
and our
потеряли
prod
возможность
just exploded.
авторизовываться.
Everybody
В этот самый
lost an
момент мы
ability to
буквально сели
authorize.
все вместе разбираться, что с
And
этим
we
делать.
had to
Откатили
understand
коммит
what
и стали
happened.
выяснять, что
We
произошло не так.
obviously returned to the back
И
commit,
суть в
to the
чем?
previous
В
commit,
случае, если у вас
and it
изменяется
turned out
наименование
that if
полей,
you
то есть в данном
change
случае у нас, в первом
the
случае у нас был username
titles
под
of
индексом 1, во втором
fields,
случае паспорт под индексом 2. А у нас
we had
паспорт и
indexes
email
1
мы
and indexes
фактически
2, but we
изменили, потому что email
basically
стал вторым,
changed
а паспорт
password and
третьим.
indexes
Это привело к тому,
because
что все
password
клиенты,
became 3
которые
and
имели
login
старый
became 2.
протоконтракт при отправке сообщений,
All the
парсили
clients
старый
that
формат.
had
И
old
мы
proto
просто не имели
format
пароля,
parsed to
мы
the
не
old
имели
format,
email
and
и
we did
username,
not
имели
have
все
emails, we
только,
didn't have passwords.
все распаковывалось только в поле email в данном случае.
Everything was worked only in the
Дальше.
email field,
Следующая
and it
проблема — это
didn't work with
версионирование
other
плагина.
fields, and that was the problem.
Важная деталь. Вот здесь, вот в этом pull
Next
request не
point is
изменилось
working
ничего,
with the plugin
если что.
versions.
Но
Nothing
изменилось
changed in this
259 файлов. В чем суть? У
in
нас
this
есть ситуация, что, вот, к
plugin.
примеру, я начинаю работать,
Only
устанавливаю плагин для
359 files
генерации
changed.
протоконтрактов,
We
все
install
настраиваем,
plugins for
отлично,
proto
потом
contract
проходит небольшой, там,
generation.
спустя, к
It
примеру,
works, but
6
somebody
месяцев. За это время
like
появляется
6
пара
months
новых версий
after
этих
come,
плагинов. И давайте честно, далеко
and they
не каждый
have
из нас
multiple versions
проверяет, что
of
вышла новая
these
версия
plugins.
плагина,
And
нужно его обновлять.
obviously,
Я лично это
we
делаю
don't
чаще раза в год.
always change those
В итоге к
extensions
чему
or
это
plugins. We
приводит? К
usually
тому,
do
что
it
при
a
перегенерации
few
новой версии
times a
плагина,
year.
несмотря на то, что
When the
ничего в
plugin is
реальности не изменилось,
regenerated,
мы
even though
видим
nothing changed in
359
reality,
измененных
we
файлов, а
do
связано с
see
тем, что просто комментарий изменился, да,
359 files
с
changed.
1.26
But
изменили генератор
basically,
на 1.28. Все
they
изменения.
changed everything
В
in
общем, мы
the
поговорили про
description.
основные проблемы
126 was
традиционного
changed to
пулсета,
128,
точнее
for
его
example.
отсутствие фактически,
So this is
и
what we covered,
что
traditional
с этим
tools or
можно
problems,
делать. И
and
на
what
самом
we
деле
can
был
do.
потрясающий инструмент Buff,
And there was a
который
great tool
решал
called
все
Buff,
это
and
просто
it
и
solved
невероятно
all those
отлично.
problems
Он предоставлял нам и линтер,
very
который
well.
формировал
It provided
определенный стиль,
linter
который задан
that
самим Buff'ом,
provided a
и
certain
он
style set by
четко
Buff
вырисован
itself,
углом, что вот будет определенная система
and
для
it worked
распространения
according
ваших всех
to Google
протоконтрактов, и все его
requirements.
будут
For
соблюдать.
example, they
Он
have
добавил
this scheme to work
автоматический
with proto contracts,
breaking-checker.
and
Мы просто на
everybody
уровне
would
CI
follow
можем
this.
отловить
It
все
had
возможные проблемы,
automatic
не
breaking
занимаясь
checker. We were able to
ручным
find all
ревью.
potential problems without
В-третьих,
going through
мы
manual
убрали
review.
ситуацию с
Point
генератором.
number 3, we did not have any problems with
Мы убрали
generators.
ситуацию с генератором тем, что у нас пропала гигантская shell команда
By
из 20 строчек
we
кода.
did not
Мы
have
превратили это
this
все в
20,
очень
30
маленькую
lines of
команду, которая
shellcode,
очень
and
хорошо
we
работает
changed it
как
to
раз.
a very small
И самое
laconic
важное,
command, and
да,
I
и
will
самое
show
сладкое,
it
как
later.
говорится, это пакетный
And
менеджер.
finally,
Буф
icing on
предоставил
the
на
cake
самом деле
is the packaging manager. Both provided a breakthrough solution, manager for proto files. It was a centralized server which had all the different registers for different proto files, basically manually transforming them from GitHub. And then they provided anyone who wanted to do so, they wanted to place their own packages there. So now let's discuss linter. Do you use linter in your work? by raise of hand. Well, I do not understand people who do not raise their hands. I don't really understand you. It's a great tool. We might like this, we might dislike this, but the main idea is that it forms a standard, and the standard is much easier to support and maintain. If you have some kind of code structure which is described in one part of the code, ideally it should be the same style everywhere. Even if you do not like, this is the standard and makes development easier and it reduces costs for business. Besides all of that, here's a good example. We have the same service which we used before, and let's try what would happen if we use linter here. We have a lot of different errors. First of all, we can see that we do not have versification. Everybody should understand versification is very important for any project, and that's why we have to use this if we want a full-fledged seamless development of our features, if we want to add something new and updates for a new service. Next, we do not have any documentation at all, which is very important. The documentation, obviously, for testers, for clients, for users who will use your contracts, it's much easier to understand what's supposed to happen, what input data it should take in, and so on. And finally, the most interesting part for me, that out4 message should be different. And now let's look why. Well, first of all, we changed the versification itself. If we add a new project or a new feature which will break some kind of back compatibility, we will be able to add a new directory with new versification and just work on our features. Second point, we have documentation. It's much easier and better working with documentation. We understand what happens inside the service without looking at the code. It was very, very good for our testers, because, well, they thank us a lot. Point number 3, I think this is one of the most interesting points regarding auth request and auth response. If we go back a little bit, you can see that we used in-count auth-info, which has password, and as a response, we use empty. We didn't need to return anything. It was useful, it was good at that time. But if we look at this format, at the different format, the path made us use a new type of message for auth response, AU authorization response, but it became empty. So why is this empty? If you return empty and you decide that you need a new field, you will break all the clients who will not migrate to the new version. Everybody who uses your contracts will not be able to process new messages, and that's why they use this format. If you use your own messages, which are verification of empty, basically this auth response which does not have any fields, and then you add some fields which you want to return, it will not break anything. It will be much easier to maintain the development of new features. It's very easy to set up. We basically just delineate everything in the config. We put what kind of linters we want to include, and it's easy to see all the changes in the code. Next point, breaking change. It's a great command, and it helped us with the problems where prot was dropping down left and right. It checked our proto contracts and compared it with the proto contracts which was in the main directory. And this command is very easy to call with CI. We don't have to do manual reviews. This will be done by the buff itself. If we do need to break something, then the buff provides this kind of system. We create a separate directory, we create a new project, and provide a new version. That's why we have an authentication system of the version 2. Thus, we both support the version number 1 and we can work on the version number 2 without breaking our clients' access to the system, to the contracts. Speaking about the package manager, it's very important to note that currently, we are working on taking all the packages from the server build, and it's basically very easy. We specify what kind of packages we need. These are the 2 most popular packages. And then we use booth mod update. Next, if we will use these types in proto contracts, we do not need this manual transfer. We can use this in the code, and the generation command will work without any problems, even though we do not have these packages in the project itself. For example, in this case, we used type money, which we got from Google APIs, and for the rule validation. The configuration is pretty simple. It uses three main files, and it turns out that a few hours ago that they uploaded a new update and they have one file, not three. And it's much easier because there are less problems with a single file. Both has the main rules for building a project. Next has rules for the separation of different microservices. And finally, the GAN has the rules for the generation of the project and service itself. So it seems good. Both provided linter, it provided break changes, the systems to check the branches. It provided even a register of packages, which was very, very good for any language. And obviously the generator itself, which made the work simpler. But is it really that good? And especially being here, obviously, it wasn't that good. Both has certain problems, and we will cover them right now. Point number one. Partially, not many people would care about this, but for us, it was a good precedent. So the point here is that we had a project, we had a new employee, and we started to understand what was the problem. They installed this project, wanted to download all the dependencies, and they get an error. It turns out that in centralized register, buff usually deletes all the packages if they do not like anything. The idea here is that some package, whatever is inside, for some reason, for some requirements, would not fulfill those requirements. They can delete commit and delete the whole package itself. Nobody, well, maybe not everybody would want to lose all the packages, especially when we're talking about full-fledged projects and full-fledged production. Next problem was with this instruction. The idea here is that the buff provided tools for Go code generation. Basically for any code generation, but Go in this case. When I wanted to use the system, which has specific URLs where you can get these plugins by showing its version, I thought it was very simple. It just downloads the plugin from its server, it installs it locally, then it runs a generator using this plugin with the correct version and solving the versification problem, and it runs well. But when I decided to get under the hood because of certain conditions, it turns out that's different. It actually sends your protocol contracts to their servers. And I think any enterprise company, any big company that has investment in their contracts would not want to lose or have another angle of attack on their company. Basically, we provided access to the whole infrastructure with a single command because we allowed all our proto contracts, all our documentation, all those contracts that has internal network communication, and all that was given to a third-party company. And obviously not everyone would agree to this kind of risk. Basically, it packages all our proto files in a certain image and sends to the server in chunks. So the next problem is probably the main one. It completely blocked Russia and Belarus. Since they have a centralized package manager, and obviously it's located not in Russia, they blocked the access. And it means that we had to go back to the olden times where we had to manually transfer packages, when we had to use GitHub modules, and so on. Clearly, we didn't want to do so. And we thought, what should we do? Because there was a problem and we had to solve the problem quick and fast. So I will tell you what we did to amend the situation. Obviously, VPN and proxy, this is the first idea which you might have in your head to solve the problem. It's very quick, it's very easy, and it worked ideally just in the moment. Well, the problem is you cannot work with this with CI. When we approached our DevOps, it was in the previous company, saying that maybe you can open your CI VPN that would look outwards to the Western companies, and they just refused point blank. They didn't want to share our contracts with other servers, but also they didn't want to have another port for external dependency. So maybe we started to look for potential alternatives. and we found the proto tool. It seems like it has the same functionality, the same linter, the same tool for backend compatibility. It provides and compiles and generates code, but it was frozen. That's the big problem. If we go to this repository, they recommend checking out buff. When buff was born, proto tool was supported by Uber. And Uber realized that buff made a lot of different features which were supported by their resources, and they said that it's much easier to place all the responsibility on the buff team, and they will just shut down the whole proto tool. It's much easier to save resources this way. So Uber basically removed proto tool, left it as an open source tool, which became buff. So we basically had to reinvent a bicycle. Obviously, you want to create something new, something you own, and you had to create something from scratch. The problem here is that not every company is ready to give you money to create a tool from scratch. We wouldn't have any resources, we didn't have any resources for development, testing, implementation. It would be months, maybe years, if we're talking about a big company. So we could not go with this solution. And we started to think, what can we do? We started to go inside the source code of buff, and they use a lot of reflections. And we decided to think, well, maybe a fork would be a good solution. Maybe we can transfer our server, but fork still takes some time to implement in our company. And here we saw that the communication, their package manager, goes through the same proto contracts, and they are available in open access. Server buff is proprietary and its code is closed, but we do have contracts for the server interaction. And thanks to those contracts, we understood that we can reverse engineer this. We basically try to analyze how the internal parts of buff are organized in order to understand, can we replace it ourselves? And here we have an idea to create an EZP, and we didn't have to move to a different service. We wanted to still use buff in our company without transferring, without migrating. How can we do this? And we thought that backend compatibility of a server would be a good solution. Basically, we created a server which would imitate or emulate behavior of a server, since we basically reverse engineered the whole internal part of buff server. We were able to understand how it works when it tries to work with dependencies. Not only it shows the route and tries to get some kind of dependencies there, but it also goes to resolver. I have no idea why, but it starts with resolver. It returns the same address as it was in resolver. Then it gets information through the resolver where it should go for proto contracts. It goes there. Once it gets proto contracts itself or themselves, we download them. So it has several stages, several steps it has to go through. We started implementing them, and since we had access to the proto contracts, it was open access, and we tried to implement them, and it worked. But now we had to understand, how do we want to implement the storage of dependencies themselves? Because one thing is to implement the proto service, which emulates their server, and the other problem is to decide where those dependency files would be stored. So the first problem was resending and proxying projects from Git hosting, and it worked until we tried to use Google APIs. And Google APIs is quite a big one. It's about 2 gigabytes. When we tried to download it, our computer basically died. It had only 1 gigabyte of RAM. And then we realized that the time to download this package could be up to 15 minutes in some cases. Obviously, not the best solution. We started to think what we could do. And by the way, if we wanted to implement direct interaction through API, and we had to work with GitLab and GitTacker. It would take even more resources. So we started to think, what would happen if we proxy, but not exactly the Git itself? And here's where we had a very interesting breakthrough. When the disk server appeared, we had some dependencies in the config, which bring about download of all the necessary dependencies. They install them on the disk. And once there is a request to pull dependencies, we get them from there. The idea is that it worked, and it worked very fast and very well. And our server basically received the request, it redirected it to the disk, it got packages from the disk and returned them. Well, the problem with versification, if you work with GitHub, you do understand what's the problem. Second point is that every time, in order to add a new package, we had to do this manually. Not the best case solution, especially if DevOps people do not want to do anything extra. We started to think, it worked, but we wanted to think even more and do it more comfortably. So since we worked with the main problem, now we were able to launch the system, and we started to think what else we can do. And we thought about creating a full-fledged CLI instrument that would replace buff. And here we faced a number of problems which Vasily will tell us about. Vasily, I give you the floor. Hello, everyone. And just to sum up what was said before, buff problems, blocking, but obviously we use with anonymizers, with VPN, it's probably easy to bypass blocking using proxies. But the main problem is that buff cannot work with corporate hostings, Git hostings. So if I want to use my proto contract, I have to use a repository on their servers, which I wouldn't want to do, because you have to rely on external servers, potentially enemy servers, maybe they will delete some kind of commit. It will be troublesome. The first idea, instead of reinventing a bicycle, especially for proto tool, the first solution, maybe there were some similar solutions, and there was Protop. It has a demonstration version. You can work with private repositories. It seems like this is the Prophet, this is the Grail, but it was frozen. It was not updated for 4 years, and it uses Java, which we didn't really want to mess with. So we started to create our own. We started with working with our own POG. And then, since we use Go, we use Git SDK for Golang, and we start working on our prototype. So the first problems are private keys, because default is that Go library cannot pull default configs for repositories, so you had to do this manually. This is not very well, it's not a very good solution. And the second problem is Google APIs. The repository is enormous, it's very problematic to download this. And there are Go package managers that works very well. It works with private keys, it works with dependencies, and we started to reverse engineer this, trying to understand how it works. We basically needed to have access, work with heavy repository, and it seemed like this was the only solution.
So it turned out to be quite trivial. First, they used auto-exec. They just have a Git client that is ready to go. For this, they get all the access to configs, private keys, so we don't have to sweat about additional configs. Then it go to repository, then change origin of repository that we would like to pull the dependencies to, and
тяжеловесными репозиториями,
we
такими же, как Google, SciPy, например. Вот.
then we resolve the issue with repositories with Google Sipki.
Эти данные. Вот. И здесь
So, but the idea is how to receive this data.
который
So
основывается на то,
we
что мы скачанный ранее репозиторий, грубо
look at the
говоря,
Git, so we get a
зафиксируем,
repository,
и потом уже куда-то
and we
перекладываем
archive
в нашу директорию, откуда мы будем подтягивать все эти
what
зависимости.
we had, and we'll put it in the end directory where you're going to get all the dependencies. So that's the summary of how the packet manager works. So what we decided to use in our in zip. So what packet manager of zip has? First, we support personalizing. We can git tag for the dependency we have and can work with the private repository. Secondly, second feature, this is legacy of buff, and the buff4 buff work. It's a file that we use. Record that it can be several directories, and one directory is just for tests, and another one for the product file, that product contracts that we need to get to. And buff is done in such a way that in this config, it shows the name of the directory from which we're going to get all the dependencies. So without that thing, initially the easy package manager didn't work. So, and again, the support for reverse compatibility was realized here. So vendoring. So that's the legacy from the previous manager. So, and I'll say a couple of words about it later. So package manager, how its config looks. So we have the reverse compatibility with the buff. So if we have the version of the library, so we also indicate it through the add. It's a git tag, just general one, and if a particular repository or the commit that we're trying to get the dependencies from, so there is no tag, so the if works simply like a Go, so it's trying to read the tag of this commit, and then if there is no tag, so they just generate one. On the slide you can see, because we added this feature 2 days before the presentation, and it didn't allow us to change the presentation. Roughly speaking, it generates a hash commit date, and the generated line is a new version of a certain package. And also, we got our zip for several projects. So this is a makefile. So we indicate the vendor product command, what we need to generate for the code. Zip has the temporary surroundings where you can see the place in the file system where we're going to put caches of our dependencies. So in this team, so we redefine this, and the next command, this generation itself. So we use the stream. It's one way to our dependencies where all these product files are put, and we add the city plugins. Referring back to the previous slides and how convenient buffs are, so we have this legacy. So before we used to use this multi-line make commands, and it was very inconvenient. It was a temporary version. We had pretty large list with the zip, so we did it just recently, and we couldn't include the presentation. So now we have the code generation. Similar to buff, we indicate the list of dependencies, the list of plugins that we need to use for generation, and as a result, we get a generated file. And wrapping up, so we kept the clear functionality of buff, so you can switch to it without any pain. So we resolved the issue of package manager, and we got the similar thing for buff. So what next? So version 0.1, the package manager we have today. Version 2 is rules for caching packages, log file support, and others. And version 3 is supporting all links rules from buff. The most difficult one was the rule import list that it checks all imports that we didn't use. For example, if we're importing certain dependency and we don't use it, so
Вот, соответственно, версии 0.4 у нас
So
добавили
Lint is not going to
генерацию
let us do
кода
that. So we have
собственно
generating
говоря,
code version 2, excuse me, version 4,
Вот, в версии 5 мы
generating
планируем
code from
перевести уже
protofiles. In the version
break and
5, we're
change, то есть
planning
проверку
to
того,
get
что у нас
to
API
break
стал
and
обратно
change checker.
несовместимым. Версия 0.6 это поддержка CI, всякие GitHub Actions,
0.6
и
is
тому
CI and
подобное.
CD support.
Вот, седьмой, ну, там дальше уже дальше история с интеграционными
And
тестами,
furthermore,
стандартной
then the
зависимостью,
integration
построением.
tests,
Вот, и
dependency
дальше решение
graphs,
каких-то правил
version
для
rules for
линта.
caching packages, and
И,
many
собственно
more.
говоря, надеемся там
And we
версии 1
hope
уже
that
стабилизировать
in
API и
version 1, we're going to
из полноценной,
stabilize
наверное, альфы
API,
какой-то уже такой релиз
and
вывести.
we'll have
Всё.
some sort of release
Спасибо.
from
И
the
ресурсный это
full-fledged
QR-код
alpha.
на GitHub.
So
Заходите,
this
ставьте
is QR
звезды.
code to the GitHub and give us a star. So I
Итак,
suppose
вопрос от
that
Рамзана.
they can hear
Связка
questions
работать
from
в
the
комнате
audience
клиентов
because it goes to the
это здорово, но зачастую авторизация происходит при помощи ключа
client
SSH.
with Git. It's
В случае
great, but
с
authorization usually
HTTPS
happens with
такой
SSH
ключ SSH
key.
не учитывается. Была ли
HTTP,
решена подобная
HTTP,
проблема авторизации?
it's not happened. The key just is not included. So we actually resolved this issue.
Я просто знаю, кто это задал вопрос.
I actually know who asked the
На
question.
самом деле там, сейчас я вспомню, как это было сделано. По сути, это по большей части
This is
перекладывается
how
так
it
или
was
иначе
done.
на системный гид. Вот.
So we put
Потому
it
что,
on
опять же, там
system
OSZ
Git.
под капотом используется.
Just
Просто у гита там есть такая история, что когда ты
under the
указываешь,
hood they
по-моему,
use
это...
auto exec.
Короче, когда ты указываешь что по HTTPS, он,
When
по-моему,
you
автоматически меняет по SSH. Вот. Такая история, поэтому у
HTTPS.
тебя остается возможность вытягивать зависимости, используя
So that's why you have this chance to
вот, но это
pull
опять же
out
всё
dependencies
системным
using
конфигом.
private keys. So, but it's all it's a
Достаточно в
config
любом случае
system.
прописать тебе ключ, и все.
It's just enough to write a key and everything will work.
Ну, пока что претендентов на подарок на лучший вопрос только один.
So actually, we don't really have candidates for the gift. Only one question is asked.
Третий человек, и я не могу вспомнить, к сожалению, кто. Можете?
You have the third guy, but I don't remember his name. So there is a third maintainer.
Даниил Подольский.
On the website is Даниил Подольский.
Сообщества в РФ. Он в целом
He is
основной
the head of
идейник
community.
изначально этого всего проекта.
So he is the foundation of the project. Right now, he doesn't deal the development. He does support and consultations.
Представители трех крупных брендов фактически.
So you are representatives of two big brands, three big.
Насколько это рабочая
brands.
история? Вот если
How-
я разработчик, например, работаю в большой компании, да?
Valid the stories. I mean,
Сейчас сталкиваемся
so I'm
с
a
тем,
big
что все больше, так скажем, разговоров про
developer, and we often see people and they talk more and more
время, где профессиональное время, да?
about things, and you don't quite understand where people have their personal time and professional time. So how do you live together, so to speak,
Вась, мне нравится,
beside
как ты
work?
отвечаешь. Это ж не рабочий.
I like how you answer.
В реальности это мы действительно за этим следим, мы
In
занимаемся
reality, yes, we do watch that, so
исключительно своей
we
собственной
do that
технике, то есть мы не пересекаем их.
mm,
Плюс проект
away from
начинался,
work
ну, в моем случае, до
in
даже
our
перехода
own
в
time.
Озон, фактически.
The project began
Я
even
знаю,
before I
что
went to
для
Ozon
крупных компаний он уже
company. I know that for big companies, they use it.
Он использует его в своей компании.
And Daniel
В
Podolsky
Positive
uses it in
Technologies,
his
кажется,
company.
тоже начали
Positive
реализовывать.
Technologies
И
started
есть еще,
realizing it too.
несколько команд из компании там.
Yeah, there are some other teams
Ну, не
from
будем там
companies. I don't know if I can say the names of that. So from one red company.
Positive Technologies работаю, поэтому я
I'm
могу
not
сказать да.
working
и
in Positive
мне
Technologies.
кажется,
Yes.
Нет, но я думаю, что нет.
Там то, что касаемо позитива, просто была история такая,
So
то, что
in
вот
Positive Technologies, the story was that they had the need to work with the GPC, with product buff, and we were Googling before I actually met Edgar and
Вот,
Daniil.
и я задал в один гошный чатик, как вы решаете это. Вот и стандартный там
And I
ответ
asked the
был, это
question
сабмодули,
how you
либо же
work
какие-то
with
VPN,
submodules
которые
or some
Вот. И потом я подключился к проекту,
something
посмотрел,
else.
что
And then I got to the project. I looked at what's interesting there. I wrote to the guys, and I'm going to contribute in the project. And it's quite interesting coincidence. So in a Telegram channel, so we had the same group of in the same group of our neighborhood.
Ваш продукт уже используется в каких-то
Your
компаниях?
product is already used in some companies.
Он используется в нескольких
Are you
компаниях,
planning to use it in some They sell they use it in big companies and some startups. Yes, so production ready state it is, and you can use that. And the core functionality of the buffer, we changed it. So one big feature should be changed, and after that, it's going to be just about stabilizing AIP.
Буфер прогрузился, и да, вопросы
So
появились.
it looks like so now we have questions.
Савин. А какие
Michael
планы
Savin is
по
asking,
поводу
so what plans
монетизации? У
you
BAF
have for monetization?
начало появляться что-то про монетизацию, а у
BAF
вас?
has something about monetization, but what about you? Are you talking about the team?
Можете повторить вопрос?
Ну, про монетизацию.
Монетизация.
Команда прайс.
Monetization,
Пока что у нас на самом деле нет
pricing.
каких-то
No,
серьезных планов по
no, we don't really have any serious plans to monetize it because we don't have ideas how to monetize decentralized manager so you can use it automatically from the box in any company. So how can we monetize? We don't know. There are ideas how to add some enterprise functionality, and if it's going to be useful, then we can provide it as a paid service. But right now we're open source until we figure out how to make it a tool that makes money. We just need to, collect some stats, analytics. So right now we gradually introduce in our department, and we're trying to gradually promote it.
Например, вполне value-added история.
JetBrains там было указано...
You had the brains, it was just an idea.
Там история такая, что у Буфа, например, есть плагины для VS Code.
The idea is that the buff has,
грубо говоря, ты пишешь у тебя в коде там импорт.
so you kind of push F4 and the Google API, you want to see what's used there.
И ходишь, смотришь, вот.
You go to definition and you look what you got, because
По-своему.
storage formats are different and we do it differently. So there was an idea to do the same thing that Buff does for cache compatibility, but if we're coding it differently in our own way, so then
Есть еще вопросы, да, не уверен, что правильно прочитаю.
there are more questions. I'm not sure that I'm going to read it.
Когда ждать версию 1.0?
When are we to expect 1.0 version? I hope by the end of the year I will have it.
Потому что фактически все
Right now we can say that because
свободное время это исключительно там выходные.
it's just free time. It's we do it
Так как история еще и не
in our days off, and so the story is not monetized. We're kind of doing it on our free time, and I hope by the end of the year we get to the 0.8 version, and it's going to be pre-production line, pre-production version, and we'll get.
Еще один вопрос от Рамзана. Рассматриваете ли вы возможность
Then there's a question
пакетов с
from Ramzan.
скопом? Например, для
Are
работы
you planning to get into packages with a bigger scope with open source community? Will
из коробки?
mirroring, will it be supported from the box?
На этом
Why?
каком-нибудь, нет?
From the box? Why do you need that mirroring?
Изначально у нас
The idea is that initially we thought there will be a server that will be transferring data. Then we canceled server, and CLI was our idea because CLI doesn't have any server. It's going to work locally and it gives you all functionality from the box. So actually, we can throw you different models for monetization. But again,
Ты должен был бороться со злом, а не примкнуть к нему. Что-то из этого.
so you have to fight the evil and not to join the evil. So our killer feature is decentralized package manager. It destroys business model of Buff. We don't want to return to it. We're trying to find different ways. Any questions? More questions? Konstantin Aristov asked a question. I would disagree with the speaker in terms of the development. You don't need the commits from community, but you need to expand the user base. And if they can come with their own wishes and can change their roadmap, yes, I will agree. The thing is, that because of that, we are doing all this PR story and we are talking about it everywhere. We are planning to launch Telegram channel to be able to exchange feedbacks.
Если очень нужно, мы можем помочь вам интегрировать нас.
If you need, we can help you to integrate us. And here's the monetization, by the way.
Консалтинг тоже хороший вариант.
Payment consulting is also paid consulting is also good. Okay, two last questions. Just two questions, right? Oleg asked the question, what's going to happen if one of your employers will decide to buy it out and to make it a closed development? Which of the two
Тогда уже.
Which of the three
Уже
decides to
децентрализировано.
buy it out? So you're already decentralized, right?
Если так получится, что все три компании
If that
объединятся, то
happens
мы
that
даже
all three
сыграем
companies
хорошую роль в развитии
merge,
IT-инфраструктуры РФ.
so
Но в
we'll
реальности
play
шанс
pretty
того, что
good
они
role
захотят
in
это
the
купить,
IT
крайне
infrastructure of
мал.
Russian Federation.
Всё-таки мы
The
пришли к ситуации, что большинство
probability
компаний
that
стали
we'll buy it
пользоваться
out,
проприетарной
it's
технологией.
very
То есть в
low.
рамках Озона, который
So,
пришел после того уже, как
so
мы начали
as part of
разрабатывать всю эту
Ozon
историю,
company,
есть своя
before
альтернатива,
actually we
которая
started
полностью замещает
developing the
крупные
story,
финансовые
so
инструменты.
there
Просто
is
они
an
оставили
alternative
полностью
that can
проприетарной.
actually
Мы
develop
сделали
the same
совершенно иначе, как это
functionality.
работает. Не
We
так,
did
как
completely
привыкли.
differently.
По этой причине
It
мы
doesn't work
сделали
as they
это
have.
другим путем. И мы
Yeah,
не
so we're
уверены, что нас
developing
вообще
in a
захотят
completely
купить.
different way. And
Причина
actually, we're
какая
not
может
sure that
быть? Получить
anybody will
0
want to
денег?
buy us out. To receive what? Zero money?
Спасибо. И последний вопрос. Антон,
And the last question,
какие
Anton.
факапы были у вас в разработке?
What fuck-ups did you have in your development?
Ну, на самом деле, чего-то
So
серьезного,
this,
наверное, не помню.
I don't really remember anything serious.
Там было веселье прилично.
Ну, пакетный менеджер, он
And
просто долго
package
по времени,
managers,
и
it was
реально
fun to
небольшой
do.
набор.
So, so and
Кстати, по поводу вот
at some
правого
point it
линтера,
felt
этого
like an unreal
импорта,
task.
вот оно довольно
But
нетривиальное было еще с этой
with the
точки зрения,
import, it
потому
was
что
quite
вообще
non-trivial
по RFC,
because
условному RFC, да, у протофайлов есть
in
такое негласное
RFC,
правило, что
they have this unspoken
название
rule
пакета у нас должно соответствовать пути, где он
that
лежит.
the
То есть,
name of the
условно, у нас
package
есть там
is
Google,
supposed to
слэш, там
match
какой-то API и слэш название
the
протофайла. И, соответственно, название
path
пакета
where
этого
it lies. So,
протофайла,
and the name
оно
of the
должно быть
product
также
file package should be called same Google dot API,
Но далеко не все,
but
например,
not
тот же самый gRPC Gateway, да, пакет, он не соответствует этому правилу. То есть у него условно путь
gRPC
импорта
gateway
один, а
package.
название
It
пакета
doesn't
другое.
match
Из-за этого
this
стандартным способом проверить
rule.
то, что этот файл был
And using a
заимпорчен или нет,
standard
нельзя было.
way
Поэтому
to
пришлось
audit you can if it was
опять же
imported or
задействовать
not.
пакетный
So that's
менеджер,
why we
как
had to use
интроспекцию
package
импортированных файлов,
manager.
то есть какие-то такие эвристики делать уже. Но
So we had to do some heuristics with that.
не прям уж такой факап, наверное. Но одна из
I
таких
wouldn't say it was a fuck up, but it was just a
Не было. В основном были
complex
сложности
task.
небольшие, с которыми
We didn't really
прекрасно
have big
разбирались.
challenges. There were some little challenges that we had to deal with.
После 1:0
I think it's too early for big fuck ups, I think.